So great. Let me take this opportunity to introduce the moderator of this August panel. Moderator, it's my honor to introduce Keyur Desai. He is our moderator. Keyur served as the Chief Data Officer of TD Ameritrade until its acquisition by Charles Schwab. He is a global enterprise data and analytics executive with 30 years of expertise in maximizing the impact of data and analytics on business results, operational efficiency, and enterprise risk and innovation. He is also author of several books, most recently in January of 2021, contributing to the book Rebooted, along with the internet legend, Vinton Cerf, he was father of the internet, and Martin Cooper, inventor of the cell phone. And in 2021, he was voted by the National Diversity Council as a top 50 multicultural leader. So over to you, Keyur.
All right. Thank you, Venkatesh, and welcome audience members to this Chief Data Officer panel discussion. We've come a long, long way from the early days in data and analytics, where gaining insights back then meant going to a database administrator of some kind in a back room somewhere, waiting a few months to obtain green bar paper reports. And over the past 30 years, we've advanced our analytics technologies, we've advanced our data management capabilities, and we've developed a groundswell of support for the notion that every company is essentially becoming a technology company. But if you ask the average business executive, despite all of these advances, they still feel like data everywhere, but not a drop of insight. And now juxtapose this feeling of the average business executive with a fervent belief that data and analytics can drive companies to achieve outsized business outcomes, and you end up with the need for a new kind of leader that has emerged in corporations over the past few years. And that leader is the Chief Data Analytics Officer. This is the leader who inspires a corporation to move from data everywhere and not a drop of insight to a sentient corporation that has mastered its data analytics. And this is the leader who depends on entrepreneurs and investors in this room to innovate, to make this transformation successful. And with me on this panel are fellow data chiefs who have taken the time to join us to share their wisdom. So let's start off with a few introductions. And Pallaw, over to you. I'd love to hear a little bit about yourself.
Sure, thanks, Keyur. And I'm trying to get my video on. Maybe in some time it will be, there's some technical difficulties.
So why you?
Why don't, my name is Pallaw Sharma. I'm the Chief Data Science Officer for Supply Chain in Johnson & Johnson. And I'm glad to be here in this panel.
Nice having you too. Anthony Scriffignano, Dun & Bradstreet.
Yes, hello. I'm Anthony Scriffignano. I'm the Chief Data Scientist at Dun & Bradstreet.
Okay. And next up, we've got Vipin Gopal.
Vipin Gopal, Chief Data and Analytics Officer at Eli Lilly and Company. Glad to be on this panel today.
Nice having you too. Inderpal Bhandari from IBM. Hi, Inderpal, we can't hear you.
Sorry. Inderpal Bhandari, nice to be here. 4-time Chief Data Officer. When I first became Chief Data Officer in 2006, there were only 4 of us globally. Just 4 people with that title, or the Chief Analytics Officer, or the Chief Digital Officer. And so I'm the last man standing of that original 4. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but here I am, and I've just enjoyed watching this community grow and blossom.
We are delighted to have you as part of this panel. Welcome, Inderpal. And last but definitely not the least, Ashok Chennuru from Anthem.
Yeah, good morning, Keyur. Yeah, great to be part of the panel discussion. Ashok Chennuru, I'm the Chief Data and Analytics Officer for Anthem. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, very nice having all of you participate in this panel discussion. Let's start off by talking about the role. With the C-level data and analytics role being fairly new, every company defines it differently. And so we'd love to understand, what is the scope of your role at your company? And I'd like to direct this question to Vipin to begin.
Absolutely. Thanks, Keyur. As we just discussed, the Chief Data Officer role has evolved over time. And it seems like the roles of every Chief Data Officer is perhaps unique to some extent compared to the other Chief Data Officers. Let me maybe frame it up a little bit with respect to the overall set of responsibilities. I sort of see this under two larger umbrellas. One is more around protect, manage, address security, privacy, quality, compliance, and so on and so forth. The necessary things that you have to do with the data in your environments and in your companies. The second bucket, the larger bucket that I see, is around value creation, business value creation through generation of insights and solutions that we were not able to do before as organizations, leading organizational and business transformations. So I do think that even though the CDO roles are different from one company to the other, it is some flavor of this combination of the first bucket around security, privacy, et cetera, the second bucket around business transformation, some combination, more focus on one, less focus on the other. That, I think, is a larger frame for CDOs, if you sort of look at it in any given organization. For me, I do hold the Chief Data and Analytics Officer responsibility. So on one end, on the D side, I have the responsibility to define the data strategy for the enterprise, to lead the company into the next generation sophistication for what we want to do with our data moving forward. And the second responsibility is around building capabilities in AI, ML, NLP, et cetera, so that we are leveraging the data that we have to solve problems and generate solutions that will eventually benefit our patients at Lilly. So that's how I would frame up my role, and I'd love to hear from others as to what their roles are.
Yeah, so that's great, Vipin. So your specific focus is what we call a mix of offense and defense, which is great. But over to Inderpal, who sort of like paved the way for many of us in this industry. How do you see your role, Inderpal? You're on mute.
Sorry. Yeah, so just to give a slightly different flavor. I mean, in general, I think these roles, the organization is looking to you to do a mix of three things. And those three things are either grow revenue or improve the efficiency with which the business is being run, or reduce the risk around the business. And the different organizations kind of cut it differently. So you have some mix of one or the other. In the 4 times I've done this, I've done all kinds of flavors of this role. Currently at IBM, my responsibility is mainly a transformation one. It's to make IBM itself into an AI enterprise, because when I joined 5 years ago or so, that was one of the things we quickly arrived at, is that enterprises didn't quite understand what AI means to an enterprise. People kind of understood what it means from a consumer standpoint, but not from an enterprise standpoint. So we said, well, our clients look very much like us. If we ourselves become an AI enterprise, then we could be a showcase for our clients and customers. And that became essentially our data strategy, was to enable IBM itself to become an AI enterprise, and then use that as a showcase for our clients and customers. So I spend about 50% of my time internally, 50% externally, and also have a very large hand in terms of all the risk reduction stuff we do around, European Union, GDPR, compliance, privacy, and all the other stuff that goes with it.
Brilliant. So again, a mix of offense, but mostly focused on the offense with some defensive responsibilities too. Anthony, at Dun & Bradstreet, you're focused on data science specifically. And we had a very interesting conversation yesterday around how within the company there is a chief data officer, and it kind of collaborates very closely with your role. Can you speak a little bit about what your focus is?
Sure. So back when Inderpal was inventing the profession, I had a role which would now be called Chief Data Officer. At that time, I was the leader of worldwide data and insight. We weren't smart enough to have that role yet in those days. But you have to think about Dun & Bradstreet as a company that kind of makes data as well as consuming data, right? So we collect information from all over the world, updated millions of times a day, make sense out of it. That's what we do. So it's not surprising that we have more than one person in the role of doing things with data. So I'll give you a slightly different perspective than the ones you've had, not of this or that, but of this and that. If I think about what are the things that we do with data, discovery, curation, synthesis, fabrication, delivery, those are kind of the big rocks you might step on. And then you have governance and quality assurance. All of those things have to fit somewhere in the organization. So we have an individual who is very focused on discovery, on curation. I am very focused in my group on what's at the cutting edge of some of the things that Inderpal was just talking about. What are the AI implications? Data isn't just about being what it used to be anymore. Now we have ethics and we have regulatory concerns that have gotten far more global. There's this concept of data for good. By the way, veracity adjudication, it's not all true. There's adversarial manipulation of data. So in my group, we do work with advanced anomaly detection. We do work with veracity adjudication, identity resolution, multilingual disambiguation of content, geospatial inference. So all of those things that are sort of at the edge of what do you do with your data in a modern context with more compute power and more capability. And then I work with our larger customers to sort of bigify our relationship and make sure that we are talking about the things that they care about and so forth. So like Inderpal said, I don't know about 50-50, but I will definitely say half and half, external and internal focus as well.
Gotcha, wonderful. And each of those topics that you mentioned warrant a panel by itself.
Of course.
So perhaps, we can have time for that next year. Now let's shift our focus over to trends, right? And the question over here is, what important business and technology trends are you seeing in your company that you're finding a need to adapt to? And so I'd love to direct this question to Pallaw Sharma at J&J.
Sure. Thanks, Keyur. At J&J, we are all driven by and governed by a phenomenal document that is written 75 years ago and is still very valid. It's called our Credo. And it starts by saying that we believe our first responsibility is to the patients, doctors and nurses, to mothers and fathers, and all others who use our products and services. In meeting their needs, everything we do must be of high quality. We must constantly strive to provide value, reduce our cost, and maintain reasonable prices. Customers' orders must be serviced promptly and accurately. Our business partners must have an opportunity to make a fair profit. When you read these things, right, which has been true forever, these are the trends which are secular, right? The quality of the product. I come from a healthcare company, which actually anything we make goes on or in people's body. These are very important. Quality is very important to make sure that everything is safe, everything is delivered well. So these trends about personalized therapies, right, making sure that what we are treating and how we are delivering is extremely personalized. The importance of providing information with the product to the customers, patients, doctors, and nurses at the right time. And the importance of data that underpins every process that we do, right, in order to serve our patient, in order to improve our operation, in order to reduce the risk, improve the quality. These trends have only become stronger and stronger, right? And data and digital technologies underpin all of these factors, and that's what we see becoming more and more important as we go ahead, right? Another important thing in the world of COVID and pandemic is around resiliency. How do we make sure that our supply chain, our supplies are resilient, right? I mean, with the amount of disruption that we have seen across the world, it's super important to make sure that we are able to predict and prevent the disruptions in the supply that we see all over the world. So that's another area of focus for us. So very high personalization, importance of real-time updates to customers and patients and doctors, importance of resilience in the supply chain. These are the factors that we are seeing that are driving the importance of data and digital technologies in our industry.
Yeah, and it goes without saying that over the last year, resiliency has been a key aspect. Resiliency has been tested on many fronts. So it'd be good to understand, in a few minutes exactly, how data and analytics can help. So let's hold that thought for a second, and I want to continue this conversation with Ashok. What important business and technology trends are you finding that you have to adapt?
Thank you, Keyur. So I would say, digitization, the acceleration of digitization in healthcare, is the trend that we are focused on. With focus really starting with digital tools. Because the future of care is not just in the hospital or in the provider office. The future of care is where it is convenient, for the consumer, right? So how do we, it starts with the digital tools. And from there, if you need to further it, or AI-driven, symptom checkers, is where you start, and then it leads from there to if you need to still have a consult with your physician, you could do it virtually, and then you go to a in-person, right? The other big trend is you can get a lot of care at home as well, so you don't have to go to the home. Health is a big trend. Right. So we see this pattern even accelerating post-pandemic, and why is, how does data and insights apply to this is, there's a lot more data being generated, in Anthem, we serve, close to 120 million lives, so that's, almost a, third of nation's population. And when we talk about data and insights, it's about getting the medical records data, deriving insights from claims so we can create that holistic lifetime patient record, and kind of serve the different constituents, whether it is providing insights to our physicians at the point of care, or, helping employers, here is where the trends are, here is what actions need to be taken now versus reacting to after, right? So those are really acceleration of digitization, acceleration of, what are the leading indicators so you can take actions now versus reacting, and then more importantly, making it easy for the consumer when it comes to managing their health.
Yeah, no, fair point. And again, over the last year, I don't know that we in our history have ever seen acceleration in digitization like we've been forced to witness over the last year. Let's shift gears, if we will, over to the opportunities that these trends create. And this is an area I'm sure that's deeply interesting to the entrepreneurs and investors in the audience. So given industry trends in your specific industry, where do you see opportunities for the greatest data, analytics, and AI innovations, right? And I'd love to come back to Pallaw, right? Because he's had a huge resiliency problem over the last year, and he's handling the supply chain resiliency for J&J. So I'd love to understand exactly where he's seen the opportunities and what opportunities he sees going forward.
Sure. So starting with resiliency, which is a very big topic for any supply, any physical supply-driven organization. It's very important for us to first of all understand what are the factors that might impact resiliency, right? And then try to predict those factors, and then at the end of it, try to prevent them, right? Or try to figure out other options of how we can make sure that we can maintain production and supply and resiliency of supply chain, right? When this whole pandemic struck, many industries, and right now we can see what is happening with the semiconductor industry, right? Many industries were actually impacted because a lot of raw materials started to get diverted towards making things which were immediately required. right? To be able to understand that how these whole nodes and edges of any supply organization is created, to understand what are the challenges that might happen in each of the node, and the risks are not only geopolitical or climate or weather based, right? The risk is it comes and hits you from something which is completely unpredictable, like a black swan event, what we are living through. So to create this whole network of nodes and edges and understand where exactly the risk might come, and then to propagate that risk across the whole supply chain and be able to take action rapidly is something which all companies are talking about. And you can see that in industry after industry, right? I mean, look at what's happening to auto industry based on what's going on in the semiconductor industry, right? So that's something that all of us will have to get really behind in terms of pushing harder. The other areas which are actually huge opportunities for healthcare and for many other industries as well is extreme level of personalization. If you think about many industries, we still have not gotten to the level of, for example, gene therapy and cell therapy, right? I mean, in order for us to provide the right care, there are lots of therapies coming out which are actually based on this individual characteristics. It's no more a generalized therapy. In order for us to do that, we need to actually reconfigure our thinking of how a product is manufactured, what number of stakeholders come in delivering that product, and how do you really configure end to end, all the way from customer to the provider to the manufacturer and back to the customer or patient, right? So these are huge opportunities that are emerging in our industries. Growth is another area, market access, how do you provide the right product to different types of market depending on their location or purchasing power and so on, right? The other area of focus for us is asset productivity, right? We actually have very large footprint of manufacturing, distribution center, warehousing, transportation. Each of these assets and machines can actually become very intelligent. First of all, they can be lit up with IoT technologies, and then they can be connected, and then they can be optimized. Trillions of dollars of assets out there. There's an opportunity to light them up, to connect them and make them intelligent, and then really operate it like a very intelligent network, right? So these are a few things that we see in our industry, starting with resiliency, then personalized therapies, a lot of focus on growth, a lot of focus on asset productivity.
Got it. And from a data analytics standpoint, how do you actually use data analytics? Where do you see the opportunities for data analytics to help you with the resiliency period?
Yeah, so data underpins everything we do, right? I mean, when we talk about predicting risks, it's all about gathering data. It's all about connecting that data. It's all about building predictive models on top of it to predict risk, right? And then that becomes the intelligence that actually gives you ideas about, how would you react when something happens, right? And how would you be ready? So data is the lifeblood behind all of these things. Similarly, in personalized, healthcare, it's ultimately a huge amount of data coming from different places that helps you organize the care, which is extremely personalized. Similarly, in asset productivity, when I talked about machine, ultimately what we are doing is we are generating a humongous amount of data, millions of data points a second. Then we are actually bringing it all together on a large scale big data platform. Then we are, creating advanced machine learning algorithms on top of it so that we can improve the productivity, which is yield. We can reduce the waste. We can, make sure that we are using these machines and lines and factories and distribution centers much better, right? So ultimately, data is the common thread that binds all of it, right? So all the way from generating the data, ingesting the data, storing it, cleansing it, modeling it, and then deploying the insights that come out of the models back into production. That's how each of these areas are being really, realized in real world, right? So that's exactly how data analytics play a huge role in driving these areas.
Brilliant. Makes a lot of sense.
Keyur,
Yes.
can I just intervene for a second? I think this is just for the audience. I think there's a question and answer button there. So if you have any questions, please click on that and ask the questions. I think I should have taken care of that, at the very beginning. So please go ahead and ask questions. There is a tag there. Please ask questions so that Keyur can handle that. Thanks.
Thank you. And so, when we talk about opportunities, Anthony, you're in an interesting industry. Like you said earlier, your business is data. And so, do you see opportunities with data products?
Of course, I hope so, right? That's kind of where we are. I'll give you maybe 3 different frames where the edge of opportunity exists, running with your theme. The first one is that whether we realize it or not, or whether we like it or not, we are actually sending ourselves as a society mixed messages, right? We want privacy. In most parts of the world, there are regulatory actions being undertaken to address privacy. We also want in our products and services, we want customization. We just said that here. Those are kind of opposite things to want, right? I want to be able to see all the data so that I can see all those nodes and edges and understand things like supply chain disruption and so forth. And I also want to make sure that we understand data rights and data localization, possibly cross-border. Well, those are opposite things to want, right? So the regulators right now are in a tough spot. They are, I think, doing a better job of defining what they're regulating, because if you write regulation around AI, good luck, right? It's not one thing, it's thousands of things. So you have to be very specific about what you're talking about in regulation, lest you unintentionally regulate something in a way that causes more of a problem than it solves. I'm a scuba diver. That regulator is really important. It keeps your lungs from blowing up, but it has to be properly designed and it has to do the right thing. The second area is disruption. I mean, it's the elephant in the room right now. Every one of us is disrupted. I think if we were doing this, in the good old days, we'd all be in the same place and we'd be shaking each other's hands. And, now I think, we're all sitting in some version of home trying to look like we're somewhere else. And, there's that, right? Well, think about what that's done to our data and the data sphere, right? Our AI some of our AI, at least the supervised part of it, wants to look at data from the past and project into a reasonably similar future. Well, that's not going to work, right? And the next methods, the Bayesian methods, all of the other approaches say, well, then collect a lot of data in near real time and decide, well, the problem is that the disruption is happening faster than the data that describes the disruption. And right. So, these are not easy questions, but they are also fantastic opportunities if we lean into them and don't just whine about it, right? Getting what you want all the time is for babies. So we have to focus on what we can use and how we can make a difference. There is not a return to normal here. There's a transition to some other state. Before the COVID pandemic happened, first of all, it didn't happen in one place all at one time. It happened in different places around the world, kind of asymmetrically. Supply chains got disrupted, but there was disruption before that. There was social unrest. There was political change going on. There was all kinds of things causing disruption and trade agreements being renegotiated and so forth. All of that impacted the supply chain as well. So it's a little bit, we have to be careful that we don't think, all right, all we have to do is focus on this one disruption and its impact on our globally disrupted supply chain, and then we're good to go. No, you're good to go for that part of the analysis. We've got to grow up in our analytical thinking about how we use all of this data. Now, the good news is we can't even measure how much the rate of change of data available is changing, right? The rate of change is changing. It's a third derivative problem, right? We can't measure that anymore. And most of that data is being pushed to the edge. It's in chips, it's in devices, it's someplace where it is created, consumed, and destroyed, very often created, never consumed, and then destroyed, or created and ignored, which is even worse. And so we have to be better stewards of all of this data that we're producing and not just get busy counting it, right? What sense are we making out of it?
Exactly. Yeah. So we talk about a supply chain problem, but we've got a data supply chain issue too. So
and we've got an opportunity formulation, right? So as we look at new products and services, we look at helping our customers respond to some of those challenges, right? Those, what I just said, if you take data out of it, are governance issues, they're supply chain visibility issues, they are optionality in terms of how you decide to try to grow your business.
Right.
you know, if you take data out of it and just look at the other side of the record, for those of us that are old enough to remember what a record is, right? If you look at the other side, you know, there's the other side of that story, which is people are not trying to consume data. They're trying to solve some business problem.
Gotcha.
What is it and how has it changed?
Exactly. No, I'd love to continue more on this. Let's shift gears for a second. Next area I want to probe a little bit is, given that the audience is mainly entrepreneurs and investors, assuming that you work with startups, what do you think about before committing to evaluate and purchase their capabilities? And if you don't work with startups, why not? And so I'd love to direct this to Inderpal.
No, so I work with startups all the time. I actually screen startups myself. I don't really have anybody else screen them in my organization. I screen the startup myself. I give them 15 minutes. If they send me something compelling, either via LinkedIn or via an email, mainly because I think that with startups, the truly innovative ones, they are ahead of the curve. You know, they are certainly ahead of the established industry. And so if you were to push that down several layers down in the organization, you're not going to get somebody looking at it in the way that they should. So I give them the shot to talk with me directly, the very first thing that I do. And I'm usually probing just because, you know, we have such a diverse responsibility at IBM, cutting across so many different facets of data analytics and AI, that usually, I mean, I'm familiar with the problem, and I try to assess whether they could help a pain point that we have. And if the answer is yes, then I probe a little bit more about the company itself, you know, where they are in their journey, how many, you know, what funding stage they're at, how many people, how good, you know, the team is. I try to get a gauge on that. And then after that, if I still want to move forward, I'll then pass them on to somebody on my team to actually kick the tires and see what they've got and compare them to what we've got. And, you know, I'd say we end up working with, I probably screen 50 to 60 startups that way every year myself, and we probably end up working with maybe 3 or 4 of them.
Got it. Brilliant. And I'm sure many are chomping at the bit to get your email and phone number. But I wish we had more time for this. So let's sort of go into conclusions over here before we answer a few audience Q&A. Lightning round, right? In 2 words or less, I'd love to go around the panel and say, what is the one innovation that you really need from this startup and investor community? Let's start off with Vipin.
Innovations under the umbrella of patient-centric.
Okay. Anthony.
Unstructured data.
Got it. Ashok.
Consumer engagement.
Brilliant. Pallaw?
I would say real-world applications.
Okay, and Inderpal.
Data sovereignty.
Data sovereignty.
Data sovereignty, yes.
Brilliant. All right, folks, we've got about 5 minutes for Q&A, and we've got some questions here. I'm just going to read off the list over here. Let's talk about bias in AI. Are you using any tools for this purpose? And I think judging by Anthony's reaction, he's chomping at the bit to answer this one. So Anthony, over to you.
So elephant in the room, there's no such thing as removing bias, because when you try to do that, you replace it with some other bias. There's certain types of trivial removal of bias that you can do, but the most important thing is to understand what the bias is and how you're treating it in the application that you're using. There's a concept in economics called decision elasticity. How wrong would you have to be before you would make a different decision? So there's a frame for understanding the impact of bias on what you're doing. Obviously, if the bias is illegal or immoral or unethical, get it out. But understand the bias that's left. When you're done cooking, there's going to be bias left. The most egregious types of bias that I see in my world are confirmation bias, right? We have so much data that we will find data that supports the crazy idea that we have, right? I also see a lot of sampling errors where we just draw ridiculous samples and then try to form conclusions from them, and methodological bias, where the wrong method is being used because that's the one everybody knows how to use.
Gotcha. No, very, very insightful. I think we could do a panel on that issue alone.
For
It's
sure.
a hot topic in our space. Let's go over to empowering employees to be more digital and data savvy, right? This is an area that is near and dear to our hearts as CDOs, right? Cultural shift, transformation, right? All the great tools that we build are worthless unless somebody uses the Ferrari and knows how to use a Ferrari. And so the question is, what's the best way to empower employees to be more data and digitally savvy? And so, Vipin, over to you.
Absolutely. This is actually my favorite topic. The survey after survey for CDOs, if you ask them what are the biggest barriers for really bringing value from data analytics in companies, usually the number one on that list is culture in organizations. And when it comes to culture, it is about people. And I do think that creating awareness about the possibilities and also empowering the employees, democratizing data in organizations, and also having a formal upskilling program in companies is going to be extremely important. So for at Lilly, I established what we call the Lilly Data Analytics Institute. And the goal for that institute is to upskill every single employee at Lilly, regardless of their role, in data and analytics. So for them to be better aware of the possibilities of data in their jobs and to be better customers and thinkers around data and analytics to make their jobs better. So I do think this is fundamental. I'm a big proponent of saying, what is the number one role of a CDO? The number one role of a CDO is about influencing the culture and organizations to be more data driven. If the CDO doesn't do it, who will do it? So great topic.
Spot on, huge area of interest there. So audience, panelists, thank you so much. We're gonna have to leave it here. I know that we could have gone on for hours. There's a lot of great discussion here. Hopefully we can convince you to come back next year. With this, thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Ashok. Thank you, Vipin, Inderpal, and Pallaw. Venkatesh, over to you.
Thank you all. Thank you very much. I think